I'm Larry Schultz, the Ares Mobile Launcher Project Manager, and I've worked for NASA for quite a few years, and one of the jobs that I had during the shuttle development phase was the lead design engineer for the mobile launcher platform. And in that regard, I was able to design, develop, and test, and basically bring to completion all three shuttle mobile launcher platforms. One of the earliest concerns or risks that we had as a project was what is the vehicle liftoff drift, and where is that drift? How close can we design and build the tower to the rocket? You know, our desire is to take and get the tower as close as we possibly can to the rocket, so that any kind of umbilicals that extend from the tower to the rocket are short and compact, and yet the other side of that is that we don't want to put the tower and the GSE on the tower so close to the rocket that it gets burned up every single time, or that the rocket actually runs into the tower. And so that was one of our earliest concerns. The umbilical is probably the most costly, most complex, most critical piece of ground support equipment that we have on the mobile launcher, and so we want to protect it by making sure that we minimize any kind of launch damage, and of course, for the vehicle's sake, avoid any kind of collision. Early on, we had some assurances from our Marshall counterparts that we had a defined drift curve, and that drift curve allowed us to take and move the tower as close as we thought was practical to the vehicle. And as time went on, that particular tentative agreement kind of blew up on us, and there was a lot of concern on the flight side that we had placed the tower too close to the vehicle. And about the time that this occurred was after we had completed the design of the entire mobile launcher structure, and after it was under contract and was being built here at the Kennedy Space Center. So we had to mitigate these concerns. There was a lot of analysis that was done by the flight. There was a lot of concerns expressed by the flight as far as contact stay-out zones, damage to the tower, and all of that sort of thing. And the way we mitigated this particular risk was that we were able to implement a placard that has reduced winds out of the south going toward the north that would basically push the vehicle toward the tower. That was accomplished and approved by the program. There are upsides and downsides to placarding. The upside is that you reduce the potential for liftoff drift toward the tower. The downside to placarding is that you reduce your launch availability. What we hopefully want to achieve is 100% availability. That is, you could launch any time, any day of the entire year. But in some cases, there are weather restrictions associated with that, and the vehicle and the ground were designed for a relatively high liftoff wind load from any direction, very similar to the shuttle liftoff loads. And so when you placard, what you do is you reduce that higher wind load to a lower wind load, and you reduce your launch availability. And in this particular case, I think the launch availability reduction was several percentage points, statistically not significant, and therefore the placarding was acceptable to not only the flight but also the ground operations folks. We also implemented a flyaway maneuver, which basically cants the engines toward the tower a little bit and moves the vehicle away from the tower during the liftoff sequence and until we actually clear the tower itself. Well, a flyaway maneuver is not anything that's new. There was a flyaway maneuver that was implemented for Apollo Saturn V, and I believe that there are probably other rockets that I'm not necessarily aware of at this point where that has been implemented. One of the concerns about flyaway maneuver was would we be directing the exhaust toward the tower, toward the ground structure, and be destroying a lot of the tower ground support equipment as we fly out past the tower. Part of the mitigation of that concern was the fact that we have very, very little ground support equipment installed in the first 100 foot of tower, and so the actual flyaway maneuver, the canning of the nozzle toward the tower, would direct exhaust to this area that basically does not have much in the way of ground support equipment at all. And so we also did some mitigation as far as increasing the design blast loads on the dog houses that protect the umbilicals, and a couple of other minor things. We also have implemented a tower washdown for other reasons. We're also planning to put in cooling water that will spray on the umbilicals that hang out closest to the rocket as the rocket goes by. And those kinds of mitigation steps would basically protect the tower and the critical pieces of GSE from a lot of the heat load, and to some extent some of the blast load that would be incurred during the liftoff sequence. So that's what we've done to mitigate this particular risk. It's in the situation now where we don't have final documentation, but we're expecting that documentation to be included in the interface control document between the flight and the ground. For the next program, for the next mobile launcher that we want to design, what we need to do is to make sure that our liftoff drift assumptions are conservative enough so that when we place the tower the first time, there are no further downstream concerns about contact between the rocket and the tower or significant launch damage during liftoff. We need to be conservative enough and understand what we think the maximum drift curve is, so that as time goes on, our estimate becomes less and less conservative and hopefully moves away from the tower and does not move toward the tower, which is exactly what happened on this particular occasion. One of the problems that we have with overall infrastructure design and development on the ground is that it takes a long period of time for us to modify or build new all of the infrastructure that's required to support a new launch vehicle system. So making decisions that are conservative enough and are not going to change our early in the program is critical to ground system development work. Liftoff drift is one of those items, and there are quite a few others. Loads, hardware deliveries that are required earlier than perhaps the flight might want are all significant concerns that the ground development process must take into account, and the flight must take into account early on. One of the goals of the ground is to take and simplify our infrastructure, reduce development time, and also reduce design and development cost. And one of the ways we do that on the ground is to try to put our ground system as close as we possibly can to the flight vehicle. And so what that means to us is that we want to put, let's say, the umbilical tower as close to the vehicle as we possibly can. What that does is that shortens the umbilicals, makes them less complex, cheaper, can be developed a lot quicker if they're smaller and more simplified. And so that's our goal. The counterpart to that is actually we want to make sure that the ground support equipment and the umbilical tower are far enough away so that as we lift off from the launch pad, the vehicle does not run into the tower and cause a catastrophic event, a bad day, nor do we really want to be so close to the vehicle that during liftoff we burn up every piece of ground support equipment that's on the tower. And so there's a balance there. And so we want to be as close, yet we want to be far enough away that we're going to be okay, and we mitigate with water and other solutions that hopefully give us the cheapest and simplest design for the operational phase. If anyone would like to talk to me about liftoff drift curve, I suggest that they contact me through the global directory, and I can be easily found, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that someone might have.